Tonight is Monday, January 28th, 2019. This is the regular city council meeting for the city of St. Peter. It is 7 o'clock p.m. We will call the meeting to order. Would all please join in the Pledge of Allegiance? The agenda, are there any changes to the agenda? If not, is there a motion to approve?
Make a motion to approve.
Second by Jerry. Next up, we have the minutes from our January 14th, 2019 meeting. Those minutes. Oh, did I? We're going to back up a little bit. All in favor of the agenda as prepared, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda is approved. Next up, we have the minutes from our January 14th, 2019 meeting. Those minutes appear on pages 4 through 8. Are there any changes or corrections to those minutes? If not, is there a motion for approval?
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor of the minutes as written, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Those minutes are approved. Next, we will address visitors. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to the, on any agenda item coming up? Seeing no one, is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to the council on any matter whatsoever? Seeing no one, we will move on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda begins in detail on page 9 and concludes with the resolution on page 27 and includes the following budgeted purchases in excess of $10,000 to Eaton Cannon for 500 RF generator 2 water nodes for $49,980, to Graymont for high calcium quicklime for $28,397.50, to SMC for 890 tons of quarter-inch quartzite stone for $24,900. Following licenses: temporary on-sale liquor license to Nicollet County Pheasants Forever for 400 West Union for April 13th, 2019. Temporary gambling license to Nicollet County Pheasants Forever for 400 West Union for 4/13/2019, and to the St. Peter Ambassadors for 229 Nassau for 3/17/19. A donation in the amount of $86,981.05 is hereby accepted with the stipulation that the funds should be restricted for youth sports. Plus, the schedule of disbursements for January 10th, 2019 through January 23rd, 2019. Are there any questions or comments on the consent agenda, Steve?
Todd, on page 22, there's a payment to the League of Minnesota Cities for, looks like MRBT's insurance. Is that for 6 months or is that the whole year? 20,000?
That is the workers' comp for 6 months,
That is,
for the
okay.
second quarter.
All right.
Everyone didn't hear that. That's workers' comp for 6-month period. You couldn't hear Sally.
Okay.
Ed had a question?
Page 19, Todd, there's Blue Earth County Sheriff for $10,587. What?
Blue Earth County Sheriff's Department is the administrative host and operations for your CIS system, which is the integrated software system for data related to criminal activities, those kind of things. So you're part of the consortium. This is your share of those consortium dollars.
Okay, thank you.
For what duration?
I don't know the answer to that one. Sally, do you know the answer to that one? I don't happen to know.
For how long?
For CIS?
I believe it's a year, but I can check on that for sure.
Yeah, we'll let you know. I think it's the year. My recollection is it's right around $10,000 a year, but we'll double check and let you know.
Roger?
I need a reminder of page 14, the Amoresco for $60,000. It says the wastewater fund treatment system.
Yep. Ultimately, Roger, the improvement that was made, that was approximately $2.6 million, there's about $900,000 of that is attributable to wastewater for new ultraviolet.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
The ultraviolet system that we need.
Correct.
Okay.
Todd, I have a question on the donation. What
Yes.
are the, said restricted for youth sports. Can you give us an example what they could be used for?
Yes, so it could be, as an example, for supplies for T-ball or for bantam baseball. It could be lots of different things that fall under youth sports. As I understand it, the bequest was made specifically for youth sports. It was not intended to go for capital improvement, so we wouldn't build a dugout with it or work on the pavilion as an example. It has to be utilized for youth sports. In that respect, it's very broad.
Right. So it could be for coaches or
You bet.
anything like that for
Yep.
summer. Okay, John?
So, as a follow-up question, the $87,000 donation is intended to augment what we are already planning on spending? Or is that to replace what we're already spending? Or what are our intentions?
Our intentions are to advance, enhance, augment, not replace what we are doing. I believe that was the intent of the giver.
And $87,000 is a substantial amount. Since it's anonymous, what process do we use to recognize or thank or a donor?
So John, in a typical situation where we knew who the donor was, we would provide correspondence to them, and at this level, certainly a phone call and maybe a few other things than thanking them for a gift of this size. In this instance, frankly, that's yet to be determined. It may be possible that the donor's name comes forward, but that isn't where it is right now. And
But
as a part of an estate, they wanted to have it settled very quickly.
It might come forward as part of just to staff and be kept private, or it might come forward and become public. It could be either way.
Could be either way, John. Yeah, I wish I had a firm answer for you, but we're trying to work with the financial advisor. So,
Well, I would think, in lieu of that, we could let the financial advisor know, if we haven't already, that,
Yep.
you know, to convey that to the heirs or the family or whoever would be still involved in it.
and that's already been done.
I had assumed so.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure. Steve?
Along with that, I just have one question. Let's say that this is, you've accepted that, you set up a dedicated fund for this. How do you ensure that down the road, that if you're not here or someone that has institutional knowledge of this, how do you guarantee that that will be used for its intended purpose? Is there any bridge that's built between the resolution and that fund?
So as a point of clarification, this fund will go into a fund that has many, many reserved items. So you receive donations of a much smaller nature on a regular basis. And so from a practical standpoint, that fund is maintained through the finance department. So it's just not me. It does relate to your finance director and other people that work within that fund. Again, practically what happens is that this is entered into an Excel spreadsheet. And on that Excel spreadsheet, it states its intended purpose and who the funding comes from, generally. Again, this one's anonymous. And so it's an internal correction. I can't tell you how often or at what level audit is done on that. And as we discussed or maybe indicated a little bit earlier, the gift here has such a broad definition that it could fall into lots of things. But so if you're asking for 100% guarantee, all I can tell you is that we track it appropriately. It certainly is our intent to use it appropriately based on the giver's wishes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Anyone else? Consent agenda. Resolution appears on page 27. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Johnson?
Aye.
Councilmember Garland?
Aye.
Mayor Zeman?
Aye.
Councilmember Cormier?
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer?
Aye.
Councilmember Graham?
Aye.
Councilmember Barris?
Aye.
Consent agenda is approved. Next up, we have unfinished business, and we have, I believe, Sally here tonight for the 2018 payable 2019 levy correction.
Mr. Mayor and Council, I'm here. We passed the levy certification in December, on December 10th, 2018, resolution number 182. The amount of the levy was correct, at $2,988,590. The actual individual items underneath that did not add up to that amount. So I'm here to make corrections to 2 items. Number 2, the library, the resolution that was passed was for $286,640. It should have been $283,640, so there's a $3,000 error there. And then the sidewalk improvements was not added into that levy, so we were $50,000 that needs to be added in. So what I'm asking for is that you adopt the resolution on page 30, making these corrections. Fiscal impact, there is no fiscal impact. As I said, the levy amount was correct. So we're basically changing the certification to the county in these 2 line items. So the individual line items that they track will add up to the total levy.
So Sally, if I can, just as a point of clarification, we are not adding. Number 2 is just a typo correction.
Correct.
And the second modification that we're making is that that $50,000, while included in the overall levy, was not included in the categoricals.
Correct. It was
Got it.
not specifically pointed out.
All right, thank you.
Question? The resolution rescinding resolution that we previously had and adopting the final 2018 tax levy collectible in 2019 appears on pages 30 and 31. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved.
Second it.
Any questions or comments at this point? Call the roll, please, Barb.
Councilmember Carlin.
Aye.
Mayor Zeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Coleman.
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Aye.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Councilmember Paris.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Resolution is approved. Thank you, Sally. Next up, we have new business, and the first up is the 2018 healthcare revenue note reissuance, and we have the pleasure of having Mr. Sweeney here this evening.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. Shannon Sweeney with David Drown Associates. The action before you this evening is a resolution that provides for the issuance of an amended and restated healthcare revenue note that replaces our 2018 C bonds. As you may recall, in July of 2018, we issued 2 series of bonds to fund the hospital project. And one of those series of bonds in the amount of $5 million was our long-term private financing that the federal government was requiring of us for this project. USDA said ultimately that we feel that this project can and should support some private lending activity, and they required us to borrow $5 million from a private source outside of the federal government, which we did through the 2018 C bonds. We are also required at that time to put our construction lending in place for the balance of the construction costs associated with the project. So we had 2 series of bonds, one of which was placed privately and is long-term, structured over a long amortization. And that was structured as a taxable note because at that time we weren't able to place bank-qualified debt at a tax-exempt interest rate because we exceeded $10 million for the calendar year. And units of government can only issue up to $10 million in a calendar year of bank-qualified debt. Now, these bonds could have been issued through a retail process where we create an official statement and send it to, the public at large. In the business we say sell it to widows and orphans. But ultimately, the cost of going through that retail transaction far exceeded the cost of working through a negotiated bank placement, and we thought the result was much better. Not only did we think it, we actually took quotes to determine, what a retail sale would net versus a bank placement, and ultimately the bank placement offers that we received were better. And so the note was structured with a conversion that was allowed if the opportunity existed to convert this from taxable to tax exempt in the new calendar year. So it's 2019, we're looking to convert this to a tax exempt note. It saves us interest. Right now, that original note at a taxable rate was locked in at 4.75%. We're going to convert that to, today it would be 3.69%, We don't actually fix the interest rate till February 7th when we close. It's based on a 10-year treasury and some additional math, but we'll be locking this interest rate within a couple of weeks. And so it's our recommendation that we make the conversion to a tax-exempt rate, approve the resolution which authorizes the issuance of the amended and restated healthcare revenue note, and provides us with long-term financing at a lower interest rate. Again, this is the $5 million component required by the federal government that we obtain through private lending sources. The balance of the project will ultimately be financed with federal funds through the USDA with a 39-year loan at a nice low interest rate. So more than happy to answer questions regarding the action in your packet.
Questions? Roger?
Hi.
Hi.
What is this about the note being reevaluated in 10 years?
Yep. The interest rate can reset in 10 years. It's commonplace for bank-placed debt to have a reset at 5 or 10 years based on some factors that, based on how the economy is doing ultimately. In this instance, we use the treasury rate plus 2.75 multiplied by 0.67. Again, it's that math that applies. That will be applied in 10 years on the anniversary. But, remember, this is $5 million out of a $46 million project. So we fix the interest rate on the vast majority. If we have debt that we want to pay off more quickly because we're doing well, this is the debt we pay off more quickly. So we may be in a position to do that as well. So
Any penalty for paying off early?
no,
Okay.
banks don't typically mind getting their money back. So investors, bond investors do, banks typically don't. So,
Okay. Yeah, new bonds could have that, but,
yeah.
okay,
Anyone else?
thank you.
Basically, for simplification for me, Shannon, is the lower interest rate that we will be paying offsets what the tax implications are to the that would have occurred. Is that basically why it is?
Yes. The bank pays tax on the interest it earns on the present note.
Right.
They won't pay tax on the new note.
Right. So
On the
therefore
interest they earn. So therefore, they can offer a lower interest rate.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments? The resolution providing for the issuance of amended and restated healthcare revenue note appears on pages 34 through 39. Is there a motion for approval?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Mayor Zeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Klein.
Aye.
Councilmember Piper.
Aye.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
Councilmember Paris.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Garland.
Aye.
Resolution is approved.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thanks, sir.
Next up, we have a vacation rental ordinance. And Todd, you're taking over for Russ tonight?
I am. Russ is under the weather tonight, so I'm going to try to do my best to cover this one. Mayor and members, this is an item that you've talked about a number of times. It's also been discussed by planning and zoning, and this is really looking for modifications to your ordinance for what some people might call bed and breakfasts or vacation rental by owner. And so there's some modifications that have been proposed, initially discussed by the city council, again, went through planning and zoning, and recommendation has come back to you. It's recommended that a couple of changes occur to the city code. We do have a handful of bed and breakfast or vacation rental by owners operating in St. Peter. We believe 2 or 3 or 4. Some of them kind of come and go a little bit depending on where they're at. And of course, it's our job to carry forth the recommendation from Planning and Zoning Commission, and it is the staff's recommendation that you provide action on this one. We've provided notices as required under state statute. So you've had the chance to talk about this at workshop a couple of different times. Page 42 might be the one that is tonight of most interest to the city council. There are full 4 bullet points there that are meant to reflect staff's understanding of your discussion at your last workshop related to potential modifications. The ordinance that is included in your packet on page 44 does not reflect those changes. It reflects the recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission. So, I'm trying to think of a good way to kick this off. I think what the council has intended, and certainly what the Planning and Zoning Commission has intended, is that bed and breakfasts or vacation rental by owners be regulated in some way. Currently, they are outside of the scope of your ordinance, and so arguably not complying with your city code related to their operation. The original intent here was to ensure that you had a city code in place so that those that wanted to operate could operate within the rules, but you'd have to establish rules first. So again, the ordinance that starts on page 44 represents those rules as recommended by the Planning and Zoning Commission. On page 42 are 4 bullet points that are points of discussion that you had at your last workshop in general, and it was our goal to make sure that those were discussed and you could make modification as you saw fit. Again, the ordinance is what was provided for. The ordinance on page 44 is the recommendation of Planning and Zoning. So if you want to make changes, we work through those bullet points. What I've tried to do as a part of this is include an additional slide that you'll see up here behind me that provides for some of those modifications. So this is language modification on A if you wanted to go forward. Let me just talk about that a little bit. The green here is language that we discussed. Actually, it's a little bit modified, but the green is language that you discussed to get rid of using that homestead classification. What you see in blue is a suggestion that was made by city council members, again, for section A only of the proposed ordinance, under the definitions, providing for definitions, to allow no more than 2 adults per bedroom. The red portion is so that units that are not occupied by the owner would have to be inspected as per your rental regulations. If it's owner occupied, so let's say we did it at my house and we had a bed and breakfast. If my wife and I lived there and we rented out 2 rooms and we did the bed and breakfast, those type of operations would not be required to meet the rental. I think the rationale that the council used in relation to that is that, well, if the owner's living there, they're going to try and make sure that it's kept up appropriately. That's maybe more problematic, or the concern was that could be more problematic for someone that's operating this without an owner occupation or occupying the building. Again, the ordinance is on page 44. If you want to take action to approve it as written, you certainly can do that. If you want to make modifications based on what I've shown you here and based on your previous discussion, we're available to help wordsmith that in the appropriate way. What this does within the body of your entire city code is it provides for additional definition, and conditional use would be necessary in certain circumstances under your code. Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to try and answer questions or try and kick it off for action if folks want to do that.
Everything we talked about then, Todd, is covered under this point A.
I believe that everything that you talked about is covered under point A,
Okay.
and then point B as well. So point B provides for the terminology that this is owner occupied, different than
Right.
owned, and again, no more than 2 adults per bedroom.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Questions? Yeah, sorry, Susie.
I believe that that language is not reflecting one of the items that we had discussed, which was the length of stay.
The length of stay, that what you see currently within what was brought forward is on page 44. And if you go to the bottom third of your paper, maybe a little bit further down, it says 36 next to it. It says visitor habitation. That one says 30 days. And I agree that that was a point of discussion within the workshop. And so there was a little bit of discussion back and forth. So that's why we called it out, but I didn't make a change there. Staff left of that thinking that first the council wanted to maybe change that to a shorter timeline, and the commission recommended 7 days. But the documentation that was provided said 30 in most instances.
Just a question. I see 30 days is often outlined in documents of this sort. If somebody wanted to rent the apartment for the month of March, why is it that we limit to 30 days versus 31?
I have to tell you, I don't know that there's a magic related to 30.
Perhaps.
I don't know that there is.
Okay.
I can't argue that 30 is better than 31 or 29 is worse than 30. I can't make an argument for that.
No matter, just curious.
Yeah.
But didn't we also say that there should be some method for the owner, if someone, we had talked about if somebody's there because their house was lost in a fire or something like that, and they may need to be there. Didn't we also say something about they could appeal or they could extend the 30 days based on hardship type situation?
Right.
I thought we
There
mentioned
was a
that.
discussion about that.
And
I guess, sorry to
Yeah,
cut you off.
no.
When we talk about a conditional use permit, I'm confused when that comes into play and what components of these rules are negotiable under a conditional use permit.
So this would come into play when it is not occupied by the owner, so a
Right.
conditional use would come into play. And so, as with all conditional uses, really anything could come into play that is reasonable to negate any negative impact to the adjoining properties or neighborhood. So as an example, it could be, and oftentimes we use this example, it could be, well, if part of their plan in this is to provide for parking in some other location with additional lighting, the lighting could be, as a part of the conditional use, have to be directed in a certain manner. Could require bushes. It could be that there's a fence required in the backyard because with a use of this type, you might expect more louder activity in a backyard on a weekend than you would in another residential property. I mean, that would certainly be up to the Planning and Zoning Commission.
So what I'm thinking about are the items here, so the limit of 2 adults per bedroom, the limit of no more than 30 days. Are those, let's say we have a situation where somebody applies for a conditional use permit and they start operating their non-occupied home as an Airbnb, and they're renting out for a weekend here or there, or for a week or something along those lines. And as time goes on, they get approached by somebody who, as in Chuck's case, or somebody says, we just sold our house, but our new house isn't going to be finished being built for 4 months or 3 months or something along those lines. Would they have a way of going back at that point and getting permission because they've already received their conditional use permit that limits them to 30 days, 2 adults per bedroom, whatever these other items were? Would they have any way of applying for some sort of extension or something in that sort of circumstance?
So your current, the proposed language in the current ordinance that you have related to conditional uses does not provide for that opportunity.
Okay.
It doesn't say that you couldn't put something in place,
Okay.
but it doesn't provide for that opportunity. In like manner, I would say, as an example, that if you set the residency length at 30 days, I don't know exactly from a practical standpoint how we're going to know
Right.
that it's 31 days, nor in my mind does this restrict this, which says, well, Carlins, I know you wanted to be there 2 months, and so on the 31st day, you got to get out for a day, and then you come back and restart
Right.
your 30 days.
Right.
I mean, there's a little bit of a practical implication here that we can certainly get into if you'd like to work on that more. From a staff perspective, we are unsure the value of debating that at length
Right.
for the amount of impact that this has within the community, but that is certainly at the pleasure of the council.
I would like to revisit at some point, maybe not tonight, maybe we can approve what we've got here and revisit this. But I'm thinking that, the most important part for me, and the reason I was interested in seeing this issue brought up in the first place, is I want to protect both entities in these sorts of arrangements. So right now, we don't have a legal framework for the folks who are operating Airbnbs out of their non-occupied homes. I want to make sure that we offer them a framework to do that. And that comes from a lot of different reasons. One is the liability on their side. So in the event of a house fire or something along those lines while their property is being utilized as an Airbnb, I want to make sure that they are properly licensed with us and operating within legal constraints that work for us that will also protect them as they go forward. Likewise, from the opposite direction, the reason that we're interested in things like a rental license inspection is to make sure that these properties have smoke detectors and appropriate egress windows and those sorts of things. So in my mind, the real reason to do all of this is to protect both sides and to make sure that both sides are operating in a way that's completely legal, and that, of course, is fitting into the neighborhood and not causing commotion or property damage or anything like that to neighbors. But I want to make sure that we give them those opportunities.
Mr. Mayor, if I could,
Yes.
if I may ask a point of clarification. You indicated that you wanted to revisit, but I was unsure as to what points you wanted to revisit.
Specifically, this idea of having a formal way for someone to extend past 30 days.
Thank you.
Or maybe it's a two-bedroom home and they want to rent it to 5 people or something along those lines. So a formal way, once they have a conditional use permit, a formal way for them to request a modification, which, again, the council has the opportunity to approve or not, but at least to give them that opportunity.
Well, we have, variance requests or variance things, but that's a long process and notifying neighbors and all that, and I don't think we want people to go through that. But yeah, I think we need to at least have it in here as a means to, or not in here, but like I say, down the road.
Mr. Mayor, if I could make a
Process
suggestion.
of appeal or amendment.
Yeah, if I could make a suggestion, that's certainly something that we could do at a later time. From a staff perspective, we would rather evaluate that upon further discussion with planning and zoning and with the city council at a further time. But we'd like for you to take at least some level of action tonight, because those that are operating currently are operating outside of your rules, essentially illegally now, and you've told us to hold off. We've held off for quite some time, and so we'd like to get something in place. If I could, one of the suggestions from staff related to the occupancy is that occupancy not be part of the ordinance and that be part of any conditional use process that goes forward. And so that's just a different way to handle it. I think that has some advantages, because I think building, the layout of the structure, some of those things could certainly impact that and be more impactful than a general 2 adults per bedroom kind of perspective. But it's, again, maybe going back to place to start, this is a reasonable place to start.
And,
Yeah,
and
go
just to clarify, I'm happy with everything that we have here this evening. So I would totally be interested in passing something this evening, in part just to get everybody up to speed and make sure that we do have that framework for the people who are operating now. And then as time progresses and we start seeing it in use, then we might be able to fine tune a little bit more. But I'm happy with approving something tonight for sure.
So for these 2 classifications, they get a physical license from the city, the owner-occupied is just given it, and the non-occupied is given it after the conditional use hearing?
Correct.
And this is something they pay for?
Correct.
They pay for more, it's a higher fee if there's a conditional use hearing required, because there's
Yes.
advertising required?
Yes.
Is that very much?
Yeah, it's a couple $100.
Okay. And how does the city know when it's appropriate that they should be issued a license?
I'm sorry, John, I don't understand
How
the
does,
question.
how does the city know that these people should have a license if they just start renting? We go out and,
John, it's very possible that we may not know, but how we would likely know is through it being advertised.
okay.
We don't know until we know. My suggestion would be, and how we became more aware of this, was actually through council members asking questions, so some of this is on you guys. But some of it is a website that says we're advertising a bed and breakfast, and here we are.
It's the same thing. I'm sure there's people renting places to people now, not in this category, that don't have rental licenses.
Just in the house?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and not owner occupied, just,
And we bump into them in various ways, John. In this instance, depending on the level of usage, it's likely that at some point, or it's possible at some point, we would get a call from a neighbor that says, you know what, June and Harvey are never there, and it's always new people every other weekend. What in the heck's going on? And so we would contact June and Harvey and say, well, what's the scoop?
yep.
And Does it matter for a non-owner occupied residence, we are setting 30 days. Do we care as much if it's owner occupied? How long they're there? Do we need to set a limit on that if it's their own house?
I don't think that we do have a limit on that, do we?
In
think
both
either.
of these, it is 30 days.
Really?
So it does not differentiate between owner occupied and non-occupied.
And that's my question. Should they be the same, or do
So
we care? if
it
it's
says
their
that
own?
under visitor habitation of less than 30 days. So these are subsets under that classification, both owner occupied and non-owner occupied.
Where
A
is-
being non-owner occupied.
Where is that in this document?
It's on page 44, bottom third of the page, where it says section 25-15,
36.
36, visitor habitation establishments engaged in provision of lodging services of less than 30 days.
It encompasses both A and B.
Correct.
For me personally, I mean,
That-
if
that-
somebody's renting it, you know, whether they're living there or not living there, it's still it's still the owner's house. So to me, I don't see why there'd be a difference if you're renting for money.
Yeah,
So,
I
as a-
guess I agree with that, Roger, and I guess the example I would use, you know, if someone has a nanny, and, you know, they're in lieu of, you know, are you paying rent, or you know, and they're there for a year, you know?
Man, you're making this hard on staff, Russ.
Well, I know, but I mean, it is maybe,
But-
maybe
yeah,
with
yeah.
just no restriction on the owner occupied.
If I can, the significance of the 30 days in this instance is developing the line between what's considered visitor habitation and what's considered rental and falling under all the provisions of a rental
Right.
certificate. So that's what the 30 days is really working to establish as a part of this.
But as it stands right now, we don't require a rental license for somebody subletting a room out of their own home. Do we? Maybe we do.
If it's greater than 30 days under the current ordinance, arguably they should have a rental certificate for that, I believe.
Yeah,
Now, I'll do
I
some
think
more
that's right.
research on the
Yeah.
ordinance, but I believe
I've-
that is correct.
Okay. In my conversations with staff in the past, I've been told otherwise.
Okay?
So if you have a roommate, for instance,
Right.
you would require a rental license for a roommate? No.
No.
That's what
Maybe
I'm
I
talking about.
misunderstood your point
So-
because you indicated
Are we,
that
are we
they-
talking about cohabitation? Is that what we're doing here?
I guess.
Your boyfriend's moving in?
Well, effectively,
I'm
that's,
sorry, I misunderstood. You said sublet.
well, I don't know what the proper terminology is. If I have a house and I'm a single person and I own a 3-bedroom house, and so I rent out a room in that house to a coworker of mine for $250 a month. They help pay some of the mortgage, and they live in that house with me. So I'm not sure what we call that. I guess that's not subletting. I'm not sure what the legal terminology is, but we don't license for that.
That would be correct. You don't license for that because that is owner occupied.
So my point is that there's no difference between our vacation rental, owner-occupied vacation rental, and the situation I just described.
Yeah, I would agree, you know, that that's the same situation.
So,
How do we enforce the 30 days then?
That's just it, you know. but-
well, but
How do you
we're,
enforce a cigarette
let's
ban?
work on one thing at a time. So I think that we kind of need to step back a little bit.
The rules until somebody's.
I completely am on board with all the rules that we have in place for the non-owner occupied facilities. But for the owner occupied, I think we need to reconsider a little bit to make sure that we're not putting these sorts of restrictions on lots of people who are operating ineffectively that way right now.
But how come non-occupied doesn't have to meet any standard?
It's our house. Mrs.
It-
Libertarian.
It's their house too in either situation. Yes,
They're not there, they got strangers there, that's like a motel.
still their house though.
And when you rent out a house and you're not there, you have a rental house, you have a rental license, life safety issues, same.
They make, their personal safety issues could be very different than ours, right, by code? They may not have fire detectors in their house, they may not have CO2, because they think, it's fine. I've
Well, I
lived
guess
here
in
10
that
years.
situation, if you are, you maybe as a subletter or a renter, an owner-occupied situation, people are responsible for their own due diligence also.
See, but I think that in every situation.
I know, but so with this here, that you kind of, at the beginning, you were kind of
It's your
arguing to me
fault.
the other side of it, so.
I'm a little bit of devil's advocate on that,
Yeah.
because,
Yeah, I hear you.
because, right, consistency. with-
Well, yeah, but what you were saying initially was, and why not have them have all of these restrictions on the owner-occupied one, is what you initially said.
If it's in Susan's situation there, to me, they're a landlord.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I agree with what she's saying about, it should be handled the same here and current, so I agree there, but I'm just saying, it seems like there's still some,
So my question, Todd, can
No
we move
standards.
forward with what, on this tonight, and then come back and visit all of these other nuances that we were talking about here?
It
or-
is certainly at the pleasure of the council.
But I mean, that would suffice for this part of it, for getting the non-owner occupied ones going.
You could approve a portion of, so as an example, you could approve the language that's above my head and not approve B if you chose not to. That's not the recommendation from the commission.
Right.
That would then mean that if it's owner occupied, it's not regulated. Those are then arguably outside of your current code.
as they are today in Susan's
As they are
example, though.
today.
So I don't want to leave that hanging forever, but I feel like at this point, we could probably take care of the issue of the non-owner occupied, so Part A, the language that's shown above Todd's head. I would be fine with, trying to approve an ordinance that addresses that issue, and then we just need to go back to the drawing board a little bit more before we tackle Part B.
So basically, the ordinance with A as written and strike B in our packet.
Correct.
When I say as written, up on the slide.
So then,
Yeah.
so then basically, we're going to end up with two ordinances at some point,
Well, it would be a second modification to this
or a second
ordinance.
modification, or
Yeah.
or maybe have a completely
This-
separate one.
This is providing for definitions. We believe that this is the best approach to this, but there are other ways to do things similar to this within your ordinance. There's not just one way to skin a cat here. We believe this is the most efficient way, an appropriate way to do that.
I guess, to me, if we leave B in, it makes Susan's example that she gave now illegal.
Yeah,
So we should move forward without B and
Yeah.
address B next month.
Right. Strike B, add A as written on the slide.
that's what guess what I was getting at, is that would be, to me, the way to approach it at this point, since there are,
More things to
yeah,
contemplate.
that, we had things come up last Tuesday night, but this was one of them that did not. And I think it's a valid, something we should.
Could I offer one more that did not come up? On page 45, the list of section 24, all a phrase, section 2440, a phrase, all this sort of stuff, you can't really tell what's
Yeah.
what. When you're looking at them, the first two are R1, the second two are R2, the next two are R3, and the last one's RP1.
Correct.
If you look them up, conditional use or permitted use. We leave out R4, which is the large lot one. We have not yet designated any area to be R4, but planning and zoning has been careful whenever we make changes to residential zones that we put the same sort of wording into R4, so that when it comes time to create an R4, you can look at it and say, no, we don't want that, no, we don't want that, instead of looking at it and say, what was it we should have added, which is a lot harder. So I think that when we come back with this, we should have R4 added on here also.
Do we therefore not seeing the detail, do we therefore need to strike the ones that say
Homestead.
homestead
Yes,
on all of these also at this point?
that's correct.
So we'd need to strike number,
So there's 4
Three,
that are listed
yeah.
homestead.
yeah, whichever has the homestead in the parentheses.
Yep.
Okay.
And that's replaced by the phrase owner occupied? Or
Well,
is it
Yes.
just stricken? That's replaced?
Yes.
Okay.
Owner occupied, okay. All
So
right,
there would be 4 owner occupieds on page 45.
3, 3, 3, and E. All right. Are we ready?
Are we including those at all?
We're including them, but we're just making, instead of homestead, it would be owner occupied, right? Is that what we
Correct.
said? Yeah,
Even-
But we're striking Part B of,
And striking part B.
and striking
Well,
part
well,
B.
you don't have a motion on the floor, but that has been your discussion so far.
But
Yeah, I'm sorry.
her
No,
point
it's
is, if you include them on the second page, it doesn't refer to
Yeah.
anything back on the first page. They are
Yeah.
orphans hanging.
I was suggesting that we just remove
Strike
all
it.
those from the hypothetical not yet
Okay?
Yeah, that
motion.
was kind of
And
my first question.
my last question before we get any further. In this language that Todd developed, we talk about having the occupancy limited at 2 people per bedroom. In Russ's comments and Todd's, they recommend that that should be left to
We believe that a more appropriate way to handle that is on a conditional use
Conditional
basis,
use.
because then the nature of the house can be taken
Contemplated.
into account as well, which could have a significant impact.
Yeah, I mean, you may have.
It's size of bedroom, and there are a number of different things
Yeah,
that
you may have a,
that could play into
I guess,
that.
think about that, yeah, they may have a bunk room or something like that,
Right?
yeah,
you know, in a house.
so.
Okay. So, all right,
So there needs to be, and I'm certainly happy to help, but there needs to be a motion to move this forward.
Right.
So that we know what direction you're going.
anyone prepared to make that motion at this time?
I
Suzie?
think at this point, I would like to make a motion to approve the ordinance that starts on page 44, but with the following modifications. First, that we strike Part B from Section 251536. And then, on page 45, we take out those same references to homesteaded properties in 4 locations. And then additionally, we substitute, instead of the language that's given for Section 2515, Part 36A, instead of that Section A, we adopt the language on the screen above Todd's head, removing the blue section that talks about, oh, perfect, thank you, Todd, that'll make it easier.
Do you want to just state that, Suzie? I mean, that what it says there?
Okay, and so the new language would be that a vacation rental by owner, not occupied by owner, would be just defined a dwelling designed and utilized as a single-family residence managed by the property's owner and having bedroom accommodations for paying guests. Such uses shall be licensed and inspected by the St. Peter building official as per the regulations contained within City Code, Chapter 10, Residential Rental Property.
Okay. Now, when you cover one eye and read it. Everyone understand the changes we've made?
Yes. I'll
Or
second the
submitting,
motion.
you're seconding that? Any more questions? This will come up again, to iron out some of the other details on the
Mr.
parts
Mayor,
we
if I
talked
can,
about.
after
Yep.
you vote, I want to circle around and make sure
Sure.
that staff has clarification on the issues that you want to talk about.
Right. Okay. All right. If there are no other questions, call the roll, please, Barb.
Councilmember Quanten,
Aye.
Councilmember Pfeiffer,
Aye.
Councilmember Graham,
Aye.
Councilmember Barris,
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson,
Aye.
Councilmember Carlin,
Aye.
Mayor Zulu.
Aye. Ordinance is approved with those changes. And now Todd.
So if I can, there are 3 primary issues that you want to make sure that we further evaluate. It may be the suggestion of staff that some of these go back through Planning and Zoning Commission. It relates to a provision that was not proposed to be changed, but this would be on page 44 under section 25-15, the 30-day basis. Now, remember, there's a couple of different perspectives related to that one. This not only relates to vacation rentals, this has to do with that line that is something and what are require rental certificates.
Right.
So that's what we're really trying to do there. So that's one, I think. I'm not sure whether you want to revisit occupancy. You removed it in what you've just approved, but I don't know if you want to revisit that occupancy issue. There's certainly probably needs to be more development or more thought on that based on your discussion, but we don't have to review that. So right now, there's not an occupancy requirement, as example, 2 adults per bedroom or anything like that.
But in each case, because right now, all that we've covered are the vacation, the non-occupied facility, the non-owner occupied facilities, every one of those would be applying for a conditional use permit. Is that correct?
Correct.
And every one of those would allow for number of occupants to be set through that conditional use permit.
That could be a condition.
Okay. I'm
It
fine.
doesn't have to be a condition, it could be a
Okay.
condition.
I'm fine leaving that to that process.
Okay?
Right. And Ed, getting back to your question about how do we, we don't. It's people, they accept, we may have to check websites or see people advertising. Otherwise, there's, with a lot of things, there's just, if people don't come forward and, be proactive about it and,
From a staff perspective, is not something that we're going to knock on everyone's door and say, are you doing this?
Well, I
It
realize
will
that. That's
probably
why.
likely be addressed through complaint.
And so this gives recourse to neighbors if there were a situation, which hopefully won't arise, where somebody's operating a facility in a way that is being disruptive to the neighborhood, then there is a process of checking in, making sure that they're following the regulations that have been set for them.
So the last item that I have, Mr. Mayor, is clarification. Should have probably been the first one, but it's my anticipation that you would like additional discussion as to whether there needs to be anything near or like what was contemplated in subsection B.
right.
That's kind of the overall question.
I think that we do need something. I just want to, here's what I want to figure out. I can imagine a situation in which you've got a couple who buy a big old Victorian house and they're renting out bedrooms as a very traditional Airbnb or a very traditional bed and breakfast situation. And in a case like that, we would want to have limits on things like the 30-day occupancy or something along those lines. That's very different from someone who buys a house and to help pay the mortgage, takes on 1 or 2 roommates who may be long or short term. Maybe it's somebody who's only here for 2 months or 3 months or something along those lines. So I want to be able to draw a line between those two things. I think that we need to allow folks to have paying roommates in their house, recognizing that that's very different from, maybe it's just a matter of intent, right? I mean, if we can distinguish somehow legally the intent of renting out rooms in your house as a temporary visitor, location, rather than somebody's roommate who's setting up, using that as their permanent address for some period of time. Again, I don't know what the legality is, but I want to distinguish between those two things, and I wasn't comfortable with the way they were distinguished here before.
I understand. I mean, from a staff perspective, we have some information from many other communities as to what they have done, but our understanding of why or how they came to that conclusion is much more limited.
Okay. All right. Good. We will, I don't know if it's good, but we'll come back and take a look at this again on part of it. All right. Thanks, everyone, for their input. Next up, we have a DNR grant land restriction.
Mayor and members, as you know, you received a grant. This is primarily related to your matching funds, about $25,000 to $27,000 for a pier, which you've already received, which is already in your public works facility, and trail development. As a part of that grant, the DNR has indicated that they want us to be able to specifically designate this property for that recreational use. One of the challenges that we have here is that the property that you see within your packet, or now up behind me here, is property that is also included as a part of the land acquisition that was done for the wastewater treatment plant in that area, and also includes a significant portion of the area that currently is underwater within what we call Hallett's Pond. And so how they've indicated they would like us to add something to the deed doesn't work for us, because wastewater treatment isn't recreation. It's important, very important, but it is not recreation. And so what we're really trying to do here, and what the resolution indicates, is that you're giving latitude to your city attorney and I, frankly, primarily Jim, to draft the appropriate documentation that can be recorded against this portion of the property to limit its use into the future for recreational purposes only, again, as a condition of the receipt of the grant from DNR.
Okay.
That's what we're trying to get to.
And will we see that?
Pardon me?
Will we see that wording before he files it with the county?
Say that again.
Will we see that wording that the attorney is working on before it gets filed with the county?
The way that this is written, no. You're directing us to do it and using your city attorney's expertise that it can be deeded to the county using that terminology, and the appropriate form and format would be determined by the city attorney.
Okay. All right.
If you want to see it back, we certainly can, but that isn't how we wrote the resolution, John.
Maybe Mr. Brandt can answer this. Why do we have this two parcels, parcel area A and parcel area B?
The only thing I can think of is that was how the legal description came in when Bolton developed the legal description. That's the only reason I can think of.
Okay.
It may very well be in two different plats.
Oh, yeah, never thought of that. Okay. Okay. I was just kind of wondering, there's just that little sliver that could have eliminated. Any other questions or comments? The resolution directing the city attorney and city administrator to complete documentation, placing restrictions of the use of Hallett's Pond as required by the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources grant agreement appears on page 48. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Roger.
In the resolution, I don't see where it says it has to be, it says recorded language restricting the use, but it doesn't say what use. It doesn't say recreation use. Does that matter?
I don't know that that matters for this. I mean, I think you're reading it appropriately. Could be argued that that's an oversight on my part in drafting the resolution. I'm hoping that you're taking my word for it that that's what DNR has told us.
Okay. It's recreation use.
Correct.
Okay.
Outdoor recreation use.
Okay.
Does say that under outdoors?
Yeah, it does. Last
On the
sentence.
last
Oh,
paragraph?
there you go. Thank you.
Okay.
Thought I had it in there.
Okay, cool.
Did we get- Okay. Anybody else? Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Pfeiffer?
Aye.
Councilmember Graham?
Aye.
Councilmember Paris?
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson?
Aye.
Councilmember Farley?
Aye.
Mayor Zeman?
Aye.
Councilmember Cotton?
Aye.
Resolution is approved. Next up, that concludes our new business. Next up, we have reports. Looks like Polar Plunge coming up on this Saturday, Groundhog's Day, and it looks like they might have got a break by, I saw the forecast was for 35 degrees with a little rain possible, but I think they'd rather have that than what we're expecting the next couple of days. Other than that, I don't have anything else to add, Todd.
Mayor members, I just have a few quick things. I will mention that there's a report within your packet starting on page 49 about the goal session on January 22nd. Kind of typical report that you see from me in that stead. I think good goal session. You were done 9:15, 9:30-ish, give or take a little bit.
Yep.
I can't remember exactly when it was done. I know it was a little bit before 10 by the time I got everything cleaned up and got home myself. City-county meeting discussion. We did have a city-county meeting. John and I were the attendees last time. I don't know if Councilmember Kwame has any other additional report that he'd like to provide about the city-county meeting from a week or so ago.
No, the only topic that there is action being taken on is the water coming in from the west on the bluff above the high school. The project we'd hoped to get funding and start work on this year was not funded. The grant was not awarded, so that might be a year. But the city and the county are meeting now in February to talk about what the city and county might do in the intervening time. So stay tuned, I guess.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move on. We do want to mention again, we have a couple of advisory board openings, one for HPC, which is the Historic Preservation Commission, and one on the Tourism and Visitors Bureau. So we want to make sure that folks know that if they are interested in that, to contact any of the council members, or certainly contact myself or Barbara at my office, and we'll be happy to share information with you. There is information on the website about what those boards or commissions do, so if you, and kind of when they regularly meet. So if you're interested in that and don't want to talk with anybody, I guess you can find it on the website, but we're happy to visit and certainly looking for folks to fulfill those spots. The last one that I have is just to make the council aware that Phase 2 of the Minnesota Square Park Pavilion project is out for bids, with those bids being due February 21st. So the advertisement is, I think, currently on our website, and it should be hitting the newspaper here if it hasn't already. So just wanted you to be aware of that and encourage local contractors and vendors to take a look at that and submit a bid at the appropriate time. One last thing that I would mention, Mayor members, we're going to try at least an experiment for a little bit. You may have saw on one of the slides at the very beginning of this presentation that all of this information that is passed out to the city council and that you look at is provided on the city's website. And so you can give us a call and see that. But let me go back to the very beginning here, almost to the very beginning. We really want to take the opportunity to let people know that that's going on. And so they could look at it on their computer and be watching it on cable, or they could print it off at home and watch it and follow right along with you as we talk about what page something is on. So we really want to provide that opportunity for folks.
Just to clarify, those packets have always been available
They have always been available, but
on the website.
frankly, we're just thinking of other ways to promote
Right.
people to be able to know what's going on and participate besides catching it on YouTube or other ways.
So the part that's new is just the
Promoting it as a part of
reminder
this.
and invitation to participate.
It's
The
kind of like
packets
getting
have-
the program directly to your house.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right.
Stay tuned, that's right.
Play along.
Play
That's what
along.
we might say, play along.
Council bingo. Anyway, does anybody else have anything else to add?
Mr. Mayor.
Ed?
Last Saturday, the fire department had their youth fishing contest down in Hallett's Pond. It was kind of chilly down there, but it wasn't too bad. I think there was about 50 kids that showed up and then had parents with them and stuff. I do believe, as of when I left, there was no fish caught. But they went through a lot of hot dogs and got a lot of neat prizes, so they had fun.
Good. Because I was kind of surprised when I heard you had that outdoors. I thought with the weather and stuff, you might go back indoors and do it, but the same amount of fish would have been caught,
Yeah.
probably.
Because the wind wasn't blowing,
Yeah,
so it wasn't.
yeah, okay. Anyone else? If not, is there a motion to adjourn?
So move, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
All in favor of adjournment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.